The night my oldest son lost his battle with brain cancer, I thought my life was over. My parents had turned their backs on me. My ex-wife mocked me when I begged for help, and I was left to carry everything on my shoulders until I broke. I came dangerously close to ending it all, but I didn't. I made a choice to keep living for my younger sons. I thought the hardest part of my story was behind me, until 1 week later I heard a knock at the door that would change everything I thought I knew about family, about love, and about survival. My name is Ethan Marlowe. I am a father of 3 boys, or at least I was until cancer ripped one of them from me. My oldest, Landon, was only 14. He loved the stars, the way they seemed endless and full of promise. My 5-year-old twins, Caleb and Noah, are bundles of energy and innocence, too young to understand the weight of the grief that consumed me. My parents, Richard and Helen, are still alive, but in many ways I lost them long before I lost my son. They see me as a failure, a man who never lived up to their expectations. And then there is Melissa, my ex-wife, who walked away from our marriage and from her children, chasing a life she thought was better without us. This is not a story about being strong. This is a story about being broken, about begging for help and being denied, about losing the most precious thing in the world and somehow finding a reason to keep going. It is about the day I nearly gave up, and the day a stranger knocked on my door and turned my pain into something I never expected. Hope. My name is Ethan Marlowe, and if you had met me a few years ago, you would have seen a man who believed he had it all figured out. I was 38, a high school history teacher in a small town where everyone knew everyone else. I had 3 boys who made me proud every single day, even though raising them on my own wasn't easy. I lived paycheck to paycheck, stretching every dollar, but I never let my kids feel like they were missing out. My life was simple, maybe even ordinary, but for me, it was everything. I lived with my children in a small 2-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor of an aging brick building. The place was cramped and drafty in the winter, and the plumbing rattled like it was begging for mercy, but to my boys, it was home. We filled it with laughter, school projects spread across the kitchen table, and stacks of library books that never seemed to stop multiplying. My oldest, Landon, was 14. He was tall for his age, with a mop of brown hair that always stuck out in every direction no matter how hard he tried to comb it down. He had a gentle soul, the kind of boy who noticed when you were tired and quietly offered to help without being asked. His love was astronomy. We would sit together on the tiny balcony outside our living room, bundled in jackets, staring at the night sky through a second-hand telescope I had bought years ago. He would point out constellations, his eyes full of wonder. "Dad," he once said, "do you think there are other kids out there looking up at us right now?" I told him I believed there were, and he smiled like the universe made sense to him in that moment. Then there were the twins, Caleb and Noah. They were 5 bundles of unstoppable energy. Caleb was bold and mischievous, always testing limits, while Noah was more cautious but endlessly curious. They were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences, inventing games only they understood, and running circles around me until I collapsed on the couch, laughing and pretending to be defeated. Raising twins was chaos, but it was also joy in its purest form. Being a single father wasn't the plan I had for my life, but it was the life I was given after my marriage to Melissa collapsed. We met in college, fell hard, and married young. For a while, it worked. But as the years went on, Melissa began to resent the life we built. She wanted more money, more status, more excitement. I was just a school teacher, a steady man with steady dreams. She wanted the opposite. When she left, she made it clear she wasn't leaving only me but the life we had built together, including the responsibilities of raising our children. Melissa remarried not long after the divorce. She lived across town in a large house with her new husband, someone who could give her the material comforts I never could. She called the boys occasionally on birthdays and holidays, but her presence was distant, like a guest star who occasionally appeared in our lives and then vanished. The boys learned not to expect much from her. I tried not to let my bitterness show, but deep down, it stung every time I saw the hurt in Landon's eyes when she missed a call or forgot a promise. My parents, Richard and Helen, lived 15 minutes away, but they might as well have lived on another planet. My father was a stern man who believed success was measured in money and titles. To him, teaching was a failure, not a calling. He saw me as weak, a disappointment, someone who had never lived up to his expectations. My mother followed his lead, rarely challenging him, her silence cutting as deeply as his harsh words. When Melissa left, I thought my parents would step in to help, but they only grew more distant. "You chose this life, Ethan," my father said once when I asked for help with the twins. "You need to handle it." I learned quickly not to rely on them. Still, even with all of that, my life felt full because of my children. Every morning, I woke up to their laughter, their arguments over cereal, their backpacks scattered by the door. My days were long, filled with teaching teenagers about history, and then rushing home to make dinner, check homework, and tuck the twins into bed while Landon and I shared quiet moments on the balcony. I was tired, always tired, but it was the kind of exhaustion that came with purpose. When Landon first began complaining about headaches, I thought it was stress from school or too much time staring at his phone. When his vision blurred and he grew dizzy, I told myself it was just exhaustion. But then the headaches became unbearable, and one night he collapsed in the kitchen while reaching for a glass of water. I rushed him to the hospital, my heart pounding with fear I couldn't put into words. That night was the beginning of everything unraveling. The doctors ran tests, their faces carefully neutral as they spoke in calm, measured tones. Then they told me what no parent ever wants to hear: a tumor, brain cancer. Words that shattered the fragile world I had built for my family. I remember gripping the edge of the hospital bed, my mind refusing to accept what they were saying, my eyes fixed on Landon's pale face. He was only 14. He still had dreams of standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon, of building rockets, of growing up. My boy, who loved the stars, was now fighting a disease that threatened to extinguish his light. That was the moment everything changed. My classroom lessons, my struggles with Melissa, my father's disapproval, all of it became meaningless compared to the fight ahead. I knew then that my life would never be the same. The weeks after Landon's diagnosis felt like stepping into a nightmare that refused to end. The hospital became a second home, its sterile smell and constant beeping monitors etched into my senses. The doctors explained treatment plans with charts and pamphlets, their words a blur as I tried to hold myself together for my son. Surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, none of it was guaranteed. All I could see was Landon lying in that bed, his once bright eyes dulled by exhaustion, and all I could think was, how do I keep my family together while the world falls apart? The problem was not only the cancer, it was life itself. I was a single father with a full-time job and 3 children, one of them critically ill. The twins, Caleb and Noah, were only 5. They needed constant supervision, meals, baths, bedtime stories, and comfort. I could not leave them alone, but I also could not abandon Landon at the hospital. Every day, I woke up torn in two, desperate to be everywhere at once, knowing I was failing in both places. At first, I tried to manage on my own. I brought coloring books and toys to the hospital so the twins could stay with me while I sat by Landon's side. They would play on the floor of the waiting room, their laughter cutting painfully against the sound of doctors' footsteps and crying families. The nurses were kind, offering snacks or keeping an eye on the boys when I had to speak with doctors, but I knew it was unsustainable. The twins deserved stability, not endless hours in hospital corridors. So I did the only thing I thought I could do. I called my parents. I dialed their number late one night, my hands shaking, my voice raw from days without sleep. "Mom, Dad," I said, trying to steady my voice. "I need help. Landon's treatments are starting tomorrow, and I can't bring Caleb and Noah with me every time. Can you please watch them? Just for a few hours a couple of days a week?" There was a pause on the other end. My mother's voice came first, quiet and uncertain. "Ethan, we are too old for that kind of responsibility. You know how your father feels." Then my father took the phone. His voice was sharp, cold. "Ethan, you made your choices. You decided to be a teacher, you decided to marry that woman, and you decided to keep those kids. It's not our job to fix your life." "Dad," I pleaded, the words tumbling out faster than I could control. "This isn't about me. It's about Landon. He is dying, and I need to be with him. I can't do this alone." "You've been coddled long enough," he snapped. "You figure it out." Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand, the silence pressing down like a weight. I felt abandoned in a way I had never felt before. My parents were only 15 minutes away, yet they had just turned their backs on their grandchildren. I sat in the dark of my apartment that night, the twins asleep in their room, Landon resting in the hospital. I thought of every moment my parents had criticized me, every time they had withheld their approval. And now, when I needed them most, they had confirmed what I had always feared. To them, I was nothing but a disappointment. Still, I couldn't give up. I had one more option: Melissa. Calling her was a last resort, but I had no choice. I dialed her number, my stomach in knots. When she answered, her voice was clipped and impatient. "What do you want, Ethan?" I took a deep breath. "Melissa, it's Landon. He's getting worse. I need to be at the hospital with him, and I can't keep bringing the twins there. They need someone to watch them. Please, I'm begging you." There was a pause, then a laugh that cut through me like a knife. "Are you serious? You're asking me to play babysitter because you can't manage your own life? You're just a broke teacher, Ethan. You figure it out." "Melissa," I said, my voice breaking, "he's your son too. He doesn't have much time. Please, do this for him, if not for me." Her tone hardened. "I moved on from that life, Ethan. You need to do the same." Then she hung up. I sat there, the phone pressed against my ear, unable to move. My chest felt like it was caving in, my heart pounding with anger and grief. I had begged her for help, not for myself, but for our children, and she had laughed in my face. From that moment on, I understood that I was truly alone. I had no parents willing to step in, no ex-wife who cared, no safety net. It was me against the storm. So I kept dragging the twins to the hospital, their backpacks stuffed with snacks and toys, while I tried to split myself between being a father to them and a caretaker to Landon. Some nights I held Landon's hand as he drifted into restless sleep, while Caleb and Noah curled up in chairs beside me, their little bodies too tired to stay awake any longer. I would sit there, my heart torn in 3 directions, praying for strength I did not have. Every morning I woke up more exhausted, more desperate, and every night as I watched my son's body weaken, I wondered how much longer I could keep this up before I collapsed completely. The night Landon died, the world seemed to stop. Outside the hospital, rain pounded against the windows, and thunder rolled across the sky like the earth itself was mourning. Inside, I sat at his bedside, gripping his hand, watching the rise and fall of his chest grow weaker with each breath. His once bright eyes, the ones that had looked at the stars with wonder, fluttered open one last time. He gave me the faintest smile, barely a whisper of his old self, and said, "Dad, don't be sad. Promise me you'll take care of Caleb and Noah." I swallowed the lump in my throat, fighting to give him the strength he deserved. "I promise, son," I said, my voice trembling. He nodded, closed his eyes, and within minutes he was gone, the room filled with silence. Not the quiet of peace, but the crushing emptiness of absence. My boy, my firstborn, was gone, and no words could change that. I lowered my head onto his chest, sobbing into the stillness, my tears soaking his hospital gown. After the funeral, I moved through the days like a ghost. The twins were too young to grasp the full weight of what had happened. They asked where their brother was, and when I told them he had gone to heaven, they cried for a few minutes and then clung to me, seeking comfort in ways they couldn't express. I gave them what I could, but inside I was hollow. At night, when the boys were asleep, I sat in the living room, staring at the ceiling. The silence of the apartment pressed in around me. Landon's telescope still stood by the balcony door, its lens pointed toward the sky he would never see again. I thought about joining him, ending the unbearable pain that gnawed at me every second of the day. One night, I sat at the kitchen table with a bottle of pills in front of me. My hands shook as I unscrewed the cap, my mind racing with memories of Landon's laugh, his questions about the stars, the way he used to hug me without warning. I told myself I had failed him. I had failed to save him, failed to protect him. The world was cruel, and I was too weak to fight anymore. As I sat there, Caleb wandered into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. "Daddy, are you okay?" he asked softly. His voice was small, innocent, but it pierced straight through me. I quickly slid the bottle out of sight and forced a smile I did not feel. "I'm okay, buddy." "Why are you awake?" "I had a bad dream," he whispered, climbing onto my lap. "I dreamed you left me and Noah." Those words broke me. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him close, feeling the warmth of his small body against mine. A moment later, Noah padded into the room, dragging his blanket, and climbed onto my other knee. The three of us sat there in the dim light of the kitchen, their tiny arms wrapped around me, their trust absolute. "Daddy," Noah said, his voice muffled against my chest, "please don't go away too." The dam inside me burst. I held them tighter, tears streaming down my face, and in that moment I made a decision. I could not leave them. I could not let them grow up without a father. Landon was gone, but Caleb and Noah were still here, still alive, still needing me. No matter how broken I felt, I had to fight for them. That night became the turning point. I took the pills and flushed them down the toilet, watching as they disappeared. A physical symbol of the choice I was making. I was choosing to live, not for myself, but for my remaining sons. The days that followed were not easy. Grief still weighed on me, heavy and unrelenting, but I began to shift my focus. I started small. I cooked the boys breakfast, even if it was just scrambled eggs and toast. I walked them to the park, letting them run and play, their laughter cutting through my sorrow like sunlight through storm clouds. At night, I tucked them into bed and told them stories about Landon, about the brother who loved the stars, making sure his memory would never fade. I also returned to teaching, though every step into the classroom felt like walking through mud. My students noticed the change in me, the exhaustion in my face, but I tried to stay steady. Teaching gave me structure, something to hold on to when everything else felt uncertain. I began to rebuild myself, piece by piece, not because I was strong, but because I had no other choice. Caleb and Noah needed me. They needed stability, love, and guidance. They needed a father who would stand in the storm and refuse to be blown away. And as I clung to that purpose, a strange thing happened. A small ember of hope began to flicker inside me. It was fragile, barely noticeable, but it was there. I could not bring Landon back, but I could honor him by living, by keeping the promise I made at his bedside. 1 week later, when I was just beginning to find my footing, there came a knock at the door. It was late in the evening. The twins were playing with blocks in the living room, their laughter filling the apartment. I stood, hesitant, wondering who could possibly be visiting us. When I opened the door, I had no idea that the man standing on the other side would change everything again. The knock came softly at first, then firmer, as though the person on the other side wasn't sure if they should be there. I hesitated. Visitors were rare. Melissa hadn't spoken to me since the day she laughed in my face. My parents had vanished from my life, their absence a wound that no longer surprised me. I wondered if it was a neighbor, maybe someone complaining about the noise of the twins' laughter carrying through the thin walls. When I opened the door, the man standing there was a stranger. He looked to be in his late 40s, tall, with streaks of gray in his hair and kind eyes that seemed unsettled as they met mine. He held a leather folder in one hand, his knuckles white from gripping it too tightly. "Are you Ethan Marlowe?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with nerves. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "Can I help you?" He shifted his weight, took a breath, and said, "My name is Jonathan Hale. I believe I'm your brother." The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I just stared at him, waiting for the punchline, for some explanation that made sense. My father had never once mentioned another child. My mother had never hinted at such a thing. The idea seemed impossible, absurd, and yet the man before me radiated sincerity. "My brother," I repeated, my voice sharp. Jonathan nodded. "I know this is a shock. I didn't know about you either, not until a few years ago. Our father, Richard, he had an affair when he was younger. My mother raised me on her own. I grew up knowing nothing about him, nothing about you. But when I started digging into my family history, I found his name, and eventually yours." I felt anger rising in my chest, not at Jonathan, but at the man who had raised me, Richard, who spent my entire life judging me, belittling me, withholding his love. Richard, who let me beg for help and slammed the door in my face while my son lay dying. He had kept a secret this big, a son he never acknowledged, while treating me like I was nothing. I tightened my grip on the doorframe, my voice shaking. "Why are you here now?" Jonathan lowered his eyes briefly, then looked back at me. "I heard about Landon. I know I'm too late to meet him, and I'm sorry. I know you don't owe me anything, but I didn't want to stay silent. I wanted to meet you, and I want you to know that you don't have to carry this alone anymore. I have the means to help, and more than that, I want to be here for you and the boys." Behind me, Caleb and Noah peeked out from the living room, their small faces full of curiosity. "Daddy, who is it?" Noah asked. I turned back to Jonathan, conflicted. My heart screamed to slam the door, to reject the intrusion of yet another complicated truth. But something in his eyes stopped me. They were not the eyes of a man looking for redemption from his own mistakes. They were the eyes of someone offering a lifeline. "Come inside," I said finally, my voice low. Jonathan stepped into the apartment, his gaze moving to the boys. He knelt down to their level, a gentle smile spreading across his face. "Hi there, I'm Jonathan." Caleb tilted his head, suspicious but intrigued. "Are you Daddy's friend?" Jonathan hesitated, then glanced at me. I gave a small nod. "Something like that," he said softly. The boys, satisfied with the answer, darted back to their blocks, their laughter filling the room again. Jonathan watched them for a long moment, his expression unreadable, then turned back to me. "I know I can't replace what you've lost," he said, "but I've spent my whole life wondering where I came from, if I had family somewhere out there. And now, standing here, I think maybe we were both missing something. You needed someone, and I needed a place to belong. I can't undo the past, but I can be here now." I wanted to be angry, to push him away, to reject the reminder of everything my father had kept from me. But instead, I felt something else. Relief. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt like I wasn't completely alone. This man, this unexpected brother, had chosen to come to me when everyone else had turned away. The weight of grief, betrayal, and loneliness pressed against my chest, but for once it didn't crush me. Instead, it loosened just enough for me to breathe. I gestured toward the couch. "Sit down." We have a lot to talk about. As we sat together in that small apartment, the twins building towers at our feet, I realized that the knock at the door was not just an interruption. It was the beginning of something new. Jonathan's presence didn't erase the pain of losing Landon or the betrayal of my parents and ex-wife. But it did bring a possibility I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. That night, after Jonathan left with a promise to return, I stood on the balcony and looked through Landon's telescope. The stars stretched endlessly above me, the same ones he had loved so much. For the first time since his death, I whispered into the night, "We're going to be okay, son." Jonathan returned the next day. True to his word, he did not come empty-handed. He arrived with groceries, children's books, and even a box of Legos for the twins. He greeted them by name, already remembering who was Caleb and who was Noah. They rushed to him with the unfiltered openness only children can give, dragging him to the floor to build castles and towers. I watched from the kitchen, unsure of what to make of it. Part of me still bristled at the idea of letting someone connected to my father into my home. My anger at Richard had not faded, and I doubted it ever would. But as I saw Jonathan laughing with my sons, his eyes full of genuine joy, I realized that whatever sins my father had committed, Jonathan was not responsible for them. He was here, not because he had to be, but because he wanted to be. Over the following weeks, Jonathan became a fixture in our lives. He came by after work, helped with dinner, and offered to watch the twins when I needed a break. He even went with me to the cemetery, standing silently beside me as I laid fresh flowers on Landon's grave. He did not offer empty platitudes or try to tell me the pain would pass. He simply stood there, sharing the weight without trying to lighten it, and somehow that meant more than any words could have. The twins adored him. They began to call him Uncle John, a title he accepted with tears in his eyes. He read to them at night, carried them on his shoulders at the park, and sat with them through their endless questions about life and death. When Caleb asked if Landon could see them from heaven, Jonathan knelt down and said, "I believe he can, and I believe he is proud of all of you." I had spent so long feeling abandoned that the sudden presence of support felt almost foreign. I struggled with it at first, still convinced that if I leaned on someone else, they would eventually walk away like everyone before. But Jonathan didn't walk away. He showed up again and again, until slowly I began to believe that maybe he wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't just Jonathan's presence that changed me. It was what his presence reminded me of. For years, I had measured my worth against the cold approval of my father and the scorn of my ex-wife. I had allowed their rejection to define me. But as I watched my sons giggle with their uncle, as I saw Jonathan invest in a family he had only just discovered, I realized I had been measuring myself against the wrong standards. Family is not about who shares your blood. It is about who chooses to stand beside you when everything falls apart. My parents had refused to be there. Melissa had mocked me in my darkest hour, but Jonathan, a man who had no obligation to me, had chosen to step into the chaos and stay. The change did not happen overnight. Grief still hit me in waves, unexpected and crushing. There were nights when I still sat by the telescope and cried until I had no tears left. There were mornings when I woke up wishing it had all been a dream. But little by little, I found strength in keeping the promise I had made to Landon. I poured myself into raising Caleb and Noah, teaching them kindness, resilience, and love. And with Jonathan's help, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, we would be okay. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned shades of orange and purple, the four of us sat on the balcony. The twins took turns peering through the telescope, squealing with excitement when they found the moon. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, smiling as he listened to them argue about whose turn it was. I sat quietly, watching them, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. I thought about Landon and how much he would have loved this moment. I thought about the night he asked me to take care of his brothers, and I felt his presence in the laughter that filled the air. I whispered silently, "I kept my promise, son." Turning to Jonathan, I said, "Thank you for being here. You don't know what this means to us." He looked at me, his eyes steady. "No, Ethan. You don't know what this means to me. I spent my whole life searching for family, and I never thought I would find it like this. You saved me too." In that moment, I understood something I had not been able to see before. Loss had broken me, betrayal had scarred me, but love had found its way back into my life in a form I never expected. I had learned that sometimes the people who hurt us are not the ones who define us. It is the people who choose us, who show up, who love us without condition, who become our true family. That night, after the twins fell asleep and the apartment was quiet, I stood on the balcony once more. The stars stretched endlessly above, and for the first time since Landon's death, I felt not just grief, but gratitude. I had lost my son, but I had not lost my purpose. I had found a brother I never knew I had, and together we were building a future that honored Landon's memory. This is what I carry with me now. No matter how dark life becomes, there can always be light waiting where you least expect it. Sometimes it comes in the form of a knock on the door, a stranger who turns out to be family, and a reminder that even in the deepest sorrow, love can still find you. That is my story. I lost my son. I was abandoned by the people I thought I could count on, and I nearly gave up. But I chose to live for my boys, and when I opened that door, I discovered that sometimes family is not who you expect, but who chooses to stand beside you when you need them most. If this story touched you, please give it a like so more people can see it. Share it with someone who needs to hear that, even in the darkest moments, hope can still find its way in. Leave a comment below and tell me your thoughts. I read every single one, and your words matter more than you know. And if you want more powerful stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And remember, you are never truly alone.